Hello and welcome to Sci-fi Stories. We are deeply grateful for your continued support, but unfortunately, YouTube has entirely disabled our monetization features, leaving our channel with absolutely zero operating budget. If you find today's story entertaining, we kindly ask that you consider donating just $1 to help us pay our dedicated staff so they can afford their living expenses and keep creating these epic tales for you. You can easily support us by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. The Zenith Agricultural Belt was a monument to the boundless arrogance and architectural supremacy of the great Sci-fi Empire. It was not merely a space station, but a sprawling, artificial ring world constructed from gleaming hypersteel and woven with colossal synthetic ecosystems. Millions of personnel moved like a relentless tide through the bustling corridors, operating atmospheric regulators and maintaining vast fields of engineered crops under the blinding glow of artificial suns. The ambient noise was a deafening symphony of blaring proximity sirens, the heavy thud of cargo lifters, and the sharp, overlapping shouts of mid-level overseers barking out logistical commands. Princess Kaelin of the Sci-fi Empire stepped onto the main concourse with the fluid, imperious grace inherent to her royal bloodline. Clad in robes woven from liquid light, she surveyed the deafening chaos of the agricultural hub with a look of mild distaste. She was accompanied by her elite retinue, a vanguard of royal intelligence guards, and the 8 supreme admirals of the imperial fleet. These admirals were towering figures clad in ceremonial platinum armor that captured and refracted the station's artificial light, representing the absolute pinnacle of Sci-fi military might. They were deep in a heated, high-level strategic discussion, their booming voices echoing over the din of the checkpoint. Then, the bioscanner at the main security gate chimed with a flat, unremarkable tone. What followed was an event so profoundly unnatural that it defied every law of imperial logic. The deafening roar of the security sector did not fade gradually. It died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed down upon the vast chamber like a physical weight. The shouting overseers froze. The cargo lifters halted in their tracks. Every single pair of eyes turned toward the entrance. A human woman had just walked through the scanning arch. She looked entirely unremarkable, entirely insignificant against the grand, opulent backdrop of Sci-fi engineering. The woman, identified by a faintly glowing tag as Ben Barry, appeared utterly exhausted. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden. Her posture, speaking of decades of relentless fatigue. She wore a bulky, outdated botanical technician suit that was heavily stained with dark engine grease, dried nutrient fluids, and the unmistakable grime of manual labor. In her right hand, she carelessly carried a battered metal lockbox. The container was partially open, emitting the distinct, pungent odor of decaying root soil and rotting plant matter that violently clashed with the sterile, perfumed air of the royal entourage. Princess Kaelin watched with narrowed, confused eyes, fully expecting the security forces to immediately apprehend this ragged vagrant for daring to drag such filth into a high command sector. Instead, the 8 supreme admirals of the Sci-fi Empire stopped their strategic debate mid-sentence. In perfect, terrifying unison, these titans of war turned their backs on the princess. Their massive platinum armor clattered as they slammed their right fists over their primary hearts and dropped heavily to one knee. They bowed their heads toward the dirty floor, executing the absolute highest and most ancient military salute, a gesture of supreme reverence reserved strictly for the divine founders of the empire. The human woman, Ben Barry, did not widen her eyes in shock. She did not fall to her knees in terror. She merely stopped walking. She looked down at the 8 kneeling warlords, individuals who commanded armadas capable of shattering entire planets, and let out a long, ragged sigh of pure weariness. She gave them a single, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. Without speaking a single word to the highest-ranking military officials in the galaxy, Ben Barry shuffled past the kneeling commanders. She found a quiet, dimly lit corner of the security plaza and sat down heavily on the cold deck plating. She placed the metal box of rotting dirt between her knees and immediately began sifting through the decaying roots with her grease-stained fingers, completely ignoring the gods of war still kneeling rigidly behind her. Princess Kaelin felt a cold spike of absolute shock pierce through her royal composure. The sheer, terrifying absurdity of the scene caused her breath to catch in her throat. A filthy, exhausted human technician had just shattered the most sacred military hierarchy of the Solari Empire, without even trying. Kaelin turned to the captain of her intelligence guards, her eyes blazing with a mixture of profound confusion and sudden, sharp terror. "Find out who exactly this human is," Kaelin commanded, her voice a harsh, demanding whisper that sliced through the lingering silence. "Investigate her background immediately. I want the true identity of this ragged creature who just brought my supreme admirals to their knees. And I want it right now." Less than 10 minutes had passed before the captain of the Royal Intelligence Guards returned to the secured high command chamber. His normally stoic, battle-hardened face was entirely drained of all color, resembling a sheet of bleached parchment. He approached Princess Kaelin with steps that lacked their usual sharp military precision, leaning in to deliver his report in a trembling, hesitant whisper. "Highness," the captain choked out, his eyes darting nervously toward the reinforced blast doors as if expecting a phantom to walk right through them. "I ran the biometric signature through the Central Imperial database. The system instantly rejected my security codes. It then rejected your royal override codes. I dug into the deepest archival networks, and the system flashed a final, absolute warning. The file on Ben Barry is locked at a black hole security clearance." Princess Kaelin felt a cold spike of dread freeze the blood in her veins. A black hole classification was practically an urban legend among the military elite. It was a theoretical data vault completely severed from the main imperial grid. A tier of secrecy so absolute that it superseded even the divine authority of the Solari royal family. Before Kaelin could even begin to process the impossible implications of this revelation, the heavy, blast-proof doors of the command chamber swung open with a violent, echoing crash. Ben Barry strode into the opulent room. The perimeter of elite royal guards, trained to identify and execute lethal threats in a fraction of a second, stood entirely paralyzed. Their armored hands hovered uselessly over the hilts of their plasma blades. They were completely stripped of their combat instincts, paralyzed not by physical force, but by the sheer, unbothered audacity of the intruder, who moved with an invisible, terrifying gravity. Without a single glance at the bewildered royalty or the heavily armed security detail, Ben walked straight up to the immaculate, gold-plated crystal table situated in the direct center of the room. She reached into her battered metal lockbox and carelessly tossed a massive, pitch-black clump of decaying root matter directly onto the table. Clods of foul-smelling dirt scattered across the pristine crystal, staining the gleaming gold inlays and filling the sterile room with the sudden stench of death. "Initiate Protocol 0, Ben declared. Her voice was flat, devoid of any dramatic inflection, yet it carried a heavy, suffocating weight that seemed to crush the very air out of the room. "You need to burn it all. Every single agricultural sector on this station. I want the entire Zenith Belt crop, all several billion credits worth of your precious engineered harvest, incinerated within the next 15 minutes. The executive director of the Zenith Belt, a bloated official draped in layers of expensive, shimmering silks, turned a vibrant shade of purple. He slammed both of his hands onto the table, his outrage temporarily overriding his confusion regarding the sudden intrusion. "Are you completely out of your mind?" the director bellowed, spit flying from his lips as his voice echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. "That is billions of credits in imperial revenue. Decades of irreplaceable genetic research. I will have you thrown into the nearest airlock for even suggesting such a catastrophic and insane. Ben Barry slowly turned her head. She did not yell over him. She did not reach for a weapon to threaten him. She simply locked her eyes with the director. Her gaze was not angry. It was entirely hollow, holding the chilling, absolute certainty of an executioner who had seen the end of the universe. Slowly, deliberately, Ben raised one grease-stained finger and delivered a single, sharp tap against the surface of the crystal table. The sharp clack echoed through the sudden silence of the room like a physical blow. The executive director choked on his next breath. All the color drained from his purple face in an instant. The sheer, overwhelming psychological dominance radiating from the human woman hit him harder than any kinetic strike. Instantly, stripping away his bureaucratic arrogance and replacing it with pure, instinctual terror. Without uttering another syllable, the director collapsed back into his gilded chair, completely silenced, submitting unconditionally to the overwhelming aura of a simple space station technician. Princess Kaylin could no longer tolerate this blatant disrespect. Her pride as the future ruler of the Solari Empire demanded immediate action. She marched to the opposite side of the table, her robes of liquid light flaring brightly with her rising fury. "I do not care what imaginary security clearance my guards claim you possess," Kaylin hissed, her voice vibrating with intense regal authority. "You are dressed as a low-level station mechanic. You step into my private sanctum, psychologically assault my director, and demand the destruction of my empire's lifeblood. I demand to know what true authority you hold to give such an order." Ben Barry did not flinch. She did not offer a polite bow, nor did she display a single ounce of customary reverence. She leaned forward, resting both of her dirt-covered hands heavily on the crystal table, bringing her face uncomfortably close to the princess. "My authority comes from the grim, unrelenting reality of mathematics," Ben replied, her voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving rasp that sent cold shivers down the spines of the royal guards. "Your atmospheric scrubbers are already failing. Sectors 4 through 9 are entirely dead zones. The black mass you see on this table is not a simple agricultural blight. It is a highly adaptive, microscopic space parasite. It is currently multiplying at a rate of 400% every 10 minutes, silently eating its way through the very structural hull of this station. It thrives on your synthetic ecosystems, using the lush vegetation to breed massively before it targets organic flesh." Ben pointed a stained finger at the rotting root, her eyes locking onto the princess with a terrifying intensity. "Your billions of credits are already gone. Princess, right now, that parasite is actively seeping into the primary ventilation shafts. You are standing here arguing with me over money, pride, and military protocol, while absolute, unavoidable death is currently knocking loudly on your front door. If you do not authorize the burning of those fields immediately, every single living soul on this station will be consumed from the inside out before the dawn of the next solar cycle." The prophecy of doom did not even have time to settle into the minds of the royal court before reality violently tore their world apart. A horrifying, mechanical groan shuddered through the deck plating, vibrating upward through the soles of their boots. The ever-present, comforting hum of the central air circulation matrix sputtered, choked, and completely died. From the massive ventilation grates set high into the vaulted ceiling, a thick, swirling cloud of grayish-black mist violently purged into the room. Instantly, the station's artificial intelligence recognized the lethal anomaly. The sterile white lighting of the command chamber was brutally severed, replaced a fraction of a second later by the harsh, strobing crimson of a maximum-level red alert. Sirens began to shriek, a deafening, rhythmic wail that signaled a catastrophic biological breach across the entire agricultural belt. "Quarantine protocol initiated." A cold, synthetic voice echoed from the overhead speakers. "Lethal biohazard detected. Total sector lockdown. Massive, interlocking titanium blast doors slammed downward from the ceiling with earth-shattering force, sealing off all exits. The heavy locks engaged with a chilling finality. Princess Kaelin, her elite guards, the 8 Supreme Admirals, and Ben Barry were now completely trapped within the reinforced walls of the core control room. The communications officers scrambled to their terminals, their fingers frantically dancing across the holographic keys as they tried to establish contact with the outer sectors. They were met only with the agonizing sound of screams dissolving into thick, wet static, followed rapidly by an absolute, terrifying silence. The outer rings were already gone. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized the elite royal guard. These highly trained warriors, accustomed to fighting visible enemies with plasma and steel, began to break formation, their eyes darting wildly around the suffocating crimson room. Ben Barry moved with the cold, clinical precision of a scalpel. She did not waste a single second on fear. She shoved past a paralyzed communications officer and took position directly at the primary command console. Her grease-stained hands flew across the pristine, holographic interface, her movements blurring with practiced, desperate speed. "Access denied," the central computer flatly declared. "Security clearance required." Ben ignored the warning. She began speaking rapidly, not in the modern imperial tongue, but in a harsh, guttural language of tactical command that had not been heard in the high courts for over half a century. She input strings of alphanumeric sequences, ancient military override codes that the Solari Empire had supposedly purged from their central data core ages ago. The holographic console sparked, stuttered, and suddenly shifted its color interface from standard imperial blue to a deep, archaic gold. She had completely bypassed the Supreme Imperial Network and seized absolute control of the station's root architecture. "I have the helm," Ben announced, her voice slicing through the rising panic like a blade. "Admirals, reroute all remaining auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields of this room. Lock down the primary thermal vents manually." It was a direct, humiliating usurpation of command. By all imperial laws, the admirals should have executed her on the spot for treason. Yet, not a single one of the 8 supreme warlords uttered a word of protest. They did not question her authority or her terrifyingly outdated access codes. The sheer force of her command triggered something deeply ingrained within them. They snapped into rigid, terrifying attention, their faces blank and devoid of their usual aristocratic arrogance. They moved to the auxiliary terminals and executed her orders precisely, mechanically, functioning no longer as grand strategists, but as reprogrammed war machines blindly obeying their prime directive. While they secured the room, Ben pulled up a high-resolution holographic magnification of the decaying root sample she had brought in. The image expanded in the center of the room, displaying a horrifying, microscopic battlefield. The royal court watched in stunned silence as the black mass pulsed and throbbed, actively consuming the healthy plant cells with ruthless, predatory efficiency. "This is not a natural mutation," Ben stated, her tone devoid of any comforting warmth, presenting the facts with lethal, clinical detachment. "This is not an agricultural blight. Look at the cellular structure. Look at the aggressive, geometric replication patterns. It is synthetic." She overlaid the microscopic feed with a heavily redacted, classified data stream she had pulled from the deepest layers of the archaic network. "This is a biological weapon," Ben continued, turning to face Princess Kaelin, who was watching the screen with wide, terrified eyes. "This is a dormant strain of the Vexed spore, a remnant from the Dark War that nearly drove your empire to extinction 6 decades ago. It was designed to remain inert in the vacuum of space for centuries, waking only when introduced to a rich, synthetic atmosphere. We did not bring a disease aboard this station. We brought a sleeper agent from the worst conflict in galactic history. The implications crashed down upon the room like a physical weight. The Vexid spores were infamous, a nightmare from history books that dissolved organic matter into a breeding ground for more of their kind. Ben turned back to the central tactical monitor. The holographic map of the zenith belt was no longer green. It was rapidly turning a sickly, pulsing black, sector by sector, as the parasite rode the remaining ventilation currents. "The multiplication rate has accelerated," Ben reported, her voice hollow. "The Central Artificial Intelligence is currently running millions of countermeasure simulations per second. The results are unified." She tapped a final key, and a massive, flashing notification filled the screen. "Survival probability is at absolute 0%, Ben said, delivering the death sentence without a tremor in her voice. "There is no chemical compound aboard this station that can neutralize a Vexid weapon. The only way to stop the spores from breaching the station's hull and infecting the rescue fleets currently stationed outside is complete. Localized thermal sterilization." A suffocating despair instantly choked the air out of the control room. Princess Kaelin staggered back, the reality of the situation shattering her royal composure. The only tactical option left on the board was to intentionally overload the station's life support core reactor, triggering a localized plasma detonation. It would successfully incinerate the Vexid threat, but it required sacrificing the station, and it guaranteed the violent, fiery death of every single living soul trapped on board. The air inside the fortified control room was already growing dangerously thin, thick with the sharp chemical stench of burning ozone and the sour, suffocating scent of collective fear. While the royal guards stood frozen in the crimson emergency lighting, paralyzed by the absolute certainty of their impending demise, Ben Barry did not stop moving. She had ripped open the primary life support terminal, tearing out the decorative gold plating to expose the raw, sparking circuitry beneath. She held a heavy industrial blowtorch in her grease-stained hand, the blinding blue flame hissing violently as she frantically tried to fuse the shattered oxygen circulation boards back together. She worked with a manic, obsessive focus, completely ignoring the desperate, shallow breaths of the aristocrats behind her. Princess Kaelin leaned heavily against the cold titanium wall, her royal composure entirely shattered. She watched the human woman work, her mind still violently recoiling from the revelation that they were trapped with a Vexid biological weapon. Through the dim, strobing light, one of the 8 supreme warlords slowly detached himself from the group. It was Fleet Admiral Tarek, a heavily scarred veteran whose life had spanned over a century of warfare. He did not possess his usual towering, intimidating posture. Instead, his massive armored shoulders sagged, and his ancient eyes held a profound, bottomless sorrow as he stopped beside the trembling princess. "You demanded to know the true identity of the human." "Your Highness," Admiral Tarek said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely carried over the violent hiss of the blowtorch. "You look at her, and you see a broken, filthy mechanic disrespecting your divine authority. You see a low-level worker, but you are looking at a living ghost. You are looking at the architect of doom." Kaelin turned her head sharply, her breath catching in her throat. The title was a dark myth, a terrifying bedtime story whispered among the military academies. The architect was supposed to be a metaphor, a historical exaggeration used to describe the horrific turning point of the Great War. "That is impossible," Kaelin whispered back, her eyes wide. "The architect is a legend, a symbol of the Dark War from 60 years ago." "She is no myth," Tarek replied softly, his gaze fixed on Ben's hunched back. 60 years ago, our grand imperial alliance was completely broken. The Vexid swarm had pushed us into the very edge of the outer rim. We had lost thousands of star systems. Billions of our people had been slaughtered. Our final battered armada was cornered in the dead sector of Acheron, surrounded on all sides by a Vexid fleet, so massive it blotted out the stars. We were entirely out of ammunition. out of fuel, and out of hope. We were preparing for the final hour of our species. The old admiral paused, his chest heaving as the phantom memories of a dead war flooded the suffocating room. Then, the human contingent offered a final, desperate strategy. Tarek continued. Ben Barry was their supreme tactical engineer. She analyzed the dead, iron core planet we were orbiting, and saw a weapon where the rest of us only saw a graveyard. She proposed a theoretical energy reversal system. It was pure madness. It required drilling straight into the planet's mantle and planting a massive network of inverted shield generators. If triggered correctly, it would instantly turn the entire dead world into an unfathomably massive magnetic wave bomb, capable of entirely vaporizing the Vexid swarm's biological armor within a radius of 10 million miles. Kaelin listened, entirely captivated by the grim history unfolding before her. But the blast radius, she murmured. It would have destroyed the Imperial fleet as well. That was the genius of her terrifying design, Tarek corrected, his voice trembling slightly. The magnetic wave was engineered to curve entirely outward, but it required a manual, continuous calibration from deep within the planetary core to maintain the safe zone around our ships. It could not be automated. The magnetic interference was too strong. Someone had to stay behind in the epicenter to hold the firing line stable until the weapon fully discharged. The hissing of the blowtorch across the room suddenly cut out. Ben had paused her frantic welding, her shoulders perfectly still in the dim light, though she did not turn around. Ben Barry took her own elite engineering crew down into the dark, the Admiral said, the heavy weight of his words pressing down on Kaelin's chest. 300 of the finest human minds. They built the firing matrix in the dark. They rigged the core. And when the Vexid swarm finally descended to slaughter us, Ben realized the localized radiation shielding was collapsing. The core was flooding with lethal gamma energy. The only way to ensure the weapon fired and save the Sylari fleet was to completely seal the primary blast doors from the outside, locking the control room down forever. A profound, chilling horror washed over Kaelin. She stared at the old warlord, praying she was misunderstanding the implication. She trapped them, Kaelin breathed, her voice breaking. She saved us, Tarek corrected. A single, glowing tear cutting a path down his scarred cheek. To activate the weapon that saved your species. Princess. Ben Barry had to manually engage the heavy blast doors. She locked all 300 of her own people inside that irradiated core. She watched her friends, her family, her entire crew burn alive through the reinforced viewing glass, while they manually held the calibration steady. She sacrificed her own humanity, her own soul, to forge a shield for ours. The old admiral slowly bowed his head, his platinum armor clinking softly in the gloom. When we kneel to her, Tarek whispered, his voice thick with an ancient, unresolved grief. We are not merely showing the respect of a grateful empire. We are offering the apologies of the damned. We are mourning the woman who had to turn her own heart into cold, unforgiving steel. She bore the unforgivable sin of mass genocide so that our universe could continue to exist. She carries a graveyard on her shoulders, Highness, and we are the ones who handed her the shovel. Princess Kaelin turned her gaze back to the center of the room. Ben Barry had reignited the blowtorch, the violent blue flame casting long, harsh shadows across her exhausted face. Suddenly, the entire perspective of the room shifted for the young royal. Kaelin no longer saw a filthy, disrespectful technician. She saw a monument to unimaginable agony. She realized that Ben's apparent disregard for authority, her complete lack of fear, and her terrifyingly calm demeanor in the face of death were not born of arrogance. They were the impenetrable layers of armor, encasing a soul that had been completely crushed by eternal, unyielding guilt. The human woman was not ignoring the danger. She simply had nothing left inside her that could be broken. Kaelin Watch the legendary architect of doom frantically trying to piece together a broken circuit board. Finally understanding that Ben Barry had already died 60 years ago in the dark, and only a ghost remained to fight the battles the living could not win. The agonizing screech of tearing titanium shattered the heavy silence of the control room. It was not a distant echo, but a violent, immediate threat occurring right outside their final barrier. The reinforced outer bulkhead, designed to withstand the raw kinetic impact of a localized asteroid strike, began to warp inward. Microscopic fractures spiderwebbed across the thick metal plating, glowing with a sickening, corrosive green light as the vexed spores actively digested the hypersteel. A fine dust of dissolved metal rained down from the ceiling. They had less than 5 minutes before the door completely collapsed and let the swarm flood in. Ben Barry did not freeze. She dropped her blowtorch and ripped open the secondary maintenance hatch beneath the primary console. Plunging her bare, grease-stained hands into the tangled guts of the station's cooling matrix, she violently yanked a pressurized liquid freon tube free. Freezing white vapor aggressively hissed into the room. She dragged the flailing tube toward the crystal table and seized her battered metal lockbox. Discarding the rotting root sample, she pulled out several heavy industrial flasks containing standard, highly toxic agricultural defoliants she used for clearing stubborn synthetic weeds. "I need a containment vessel," Ben barked, her voice perfectly steady despite the apocalyptic sounds of the door tearing apart. She snatched a heavy, empty emergency oxygen cylinder from the wall bracket, unscrewed the top, and began pouring the toxic defoliants inside. "What are you doing?" Princess Kaelin asked, her voice trembling as she watched the metal door bulge dangerously inward. "I am building a bomb, Princess," Ben replied coldly, forcing the freon tube directly into the cylinder. "The vexed spores are biological machines. They adapt to kinetic and thermal trauma, but they cannot adapt to a rapid, localized absolute zero chemical shockwave combined with aggressive corrosive acids. This is a highly unstable, theoretical antibody serum." The mixture inside the cylinder instantly reacted. It began to violently boil and violently hiss, the thick metal exterior frosting over with a layer of rapidly expanding ice, while simultaneously radiating a blistering, unnatural heat. It was a chaotic, impossible chemical reaction that looked ready to detonate at any second. Ben slammed the heavy cap back onto the cylinder, sealing the volatile mixture. She looked up at the main tactical display. The automated atmospheric dispersal system was completely dark, the network entirely devoured by the parasite. "The automated vents are dead," Ben stated, hoisting the heavy, boiling canister onto her shoulder. The intense temperature variance instantly seared through the thick fabric of her worn technician suit, but she did not even wince. "The only way to disperse this serum across the zenith belt is to manually plug it directly into the primary heat exchange port of the central reactor core. The reactor's internal pressure will instantly vaporize the liquid and violently blast the antibody through every remaining open channel on this station." Admiral Tarek stepped forward immediately, his massive platinum boots heavy on the deck. He was followed without hesitation by the other 7 supreme commanders of the Solari Empire. "Give me the canister, Architect," Tarek ordered, his voice booming with absolute resolve. "The corridor leading to the central reactor is fully compromised. It is flooded with a swarm. Whoever walks out that door will be eaten alive before they even reach the core. We are heavily armored. We will form a vanguard, punch through the swarm, and manually detonate the charge. Let us finally repay the blood debt we have owed you for 60 years." The Admirals drew their plasma blades in unison, the deadly weapons humming with lethal energy. They were fully prepared to march into absolute oblivion, eager to lay down their lives to buy their legendary savior a chance to breathe. Ben Barry looked at the 8 towering titans of war. Her hollow eyes remained completely devoid of any sentimentality or gratitude. She slowly reached down to her left wrist, pulling back the grimy sleeve of her suit to reveal a sleek, archaic, military tactical interface strapped to her forearm. "I do not accept your sacrifice," Ben said. Her voice was as cold and hard as the vacuum of space. "Your armor will not last 30 seconds out there, and I do not need anyone else dying to balance my ledger." Before Tarek could utter another word of protest, Ben slammed her palm onto the interface. A sharp, electronic pulse violently ripped through the room. Instantly, the glowing power cores on the backs of the Admiral's platinum armor surged and died. Their plasma blades sputtered out, plunging them back into the dim crimson light. The hydraulic joints of their massive suits violently locked into place, freezing all 8 Supreme Commanders in their tracks. They became literal statues, completely trapped inside their own battle gear by her absolute command override. "Architect, stop!" Tarek roared, his voice muffled from within his paralyzed helmet. "You cannot do this!" Ben ignored him. She turned her steely gaze toward Princess Kaelin and the paralyzed royal guards. "Get into the primary escape bunker," Ben commanded, pointing toward the heavily reinforced safe room located at the back of the command center. "Now." The princess hesitated, paralyzed by the sheer, crushing weight of the moment. Ben did not wait for her compliance. She surged forward, grabbing Kaelin by the shoulder of her liquid light robes, and violently shoved the royal heir toward the bunker. The royal guards, their own electronic armor suddenly sluggish and unresponsive to their commands, were forced backward alongside their princess. Ben shoved the heavy, boiling canister tighter against her chest. She stood at the threshold of the bunker, looking at the trapped, desperate faces of the royalty and the frozen, shouting warlords. "Seal the door," Ben ordered the computer. The thick titanium slabs of the safe room slammed shut, instantly silencing the frantic shouts of the admirals and the terrified gasps of the princess. The heavy locking mechanisms engaged with a permanent, final click. Ben Barry stood completely alone in the dying command room, the horrific screeching of the outer bulkhead reaching a deafening crescendo. She turned her back to the bunker, tightened her grip on the volatile bomb, and prepared to walk directly into hell. The heavy titanium bulkhead finally gave way with a deafening, metallic scream. The massive doors buckled inward, tearing off their hinges as a tidal wave of pitch black. Swirling mist violently flooded into the command center. Ben Barry did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. Clutching the violently shaking, freezing cylinder of unstable chemical serum to her chest, she stepped directly into the suffocating darkness of the breached corridor. The air outside the control room was no longer composed of oxygen. It was a thick, breathing soup of vexid spores. The microscopic parasites instantly swarmed her, their tiny, razor-sharp geometric structures frantically trying to find a weakness in her stained botanical technician suit. The corridor, once a pristine marvel of Solari engineering gleaming with liquid light, had been completely transformed into a grotesque, pulsating cavern of rotting biological matter. Thick, fibrous black vines coated the walls, dripping with a highly corrosive, foul-smelling acid that hissed as it ate into the floor plating. As Ben waded deeper into the infected sector, the vexed organism recognized the lethal threat she carried. The parasite was not merely a mindless plague. It was a highly evolved, predatory intelligence that utilized aggressive psychological warfare as its primary defense mechanism. A potent neurohallucinogenic toxin seeped through the microtears in Ben's suit, directly attacking the darkest, most vulnerable corners of her mind. The darkness ahead began to shift and morph. The black vines twisted into human shapes. Suddenly, Ben was no longer walking down a space station corridor. She was back in the subterranean depths of that dead, iron core planet from 60 years ago. Through the suffocating mist, agonizing screams echoed directly into her brain. She saw them. Her entire elite engineering crew. 300 brilliant men and women, trapped behind the reinforced viewing glass of the planetary core. Their faces were melting under the intense gamma radiation, their hands desperately pounding against the impenetrable glass as they burned alive. "Why did you leave us behind?" a voice whispered, perfectly mimicking the terrified cry of her former second-in-command. "You locked the door. Ben, you murdered us." The hallucinogenic phantoms reached out from the walls, their burning, skeletal hands grabbing at her suit, trying to drag her down into the pulsating mass of vines. A normal mind would have instantly shattered under the crushing weight of such horrific psychic trauma. A normal soldier would have dropped the canister and fallen to their knees in absolute, mind-breaking agony. But Ben Barry was not a normal soldier. She did not break. She did not even slow her relentless pace. Instead of trying to fight the overwhelming guilt, Ben embraced it. She weaponized her own eternal torment, using the raw, unadulterated pain of her past as an impenetrable psychological shield. The vexed parasite was trying to break a mind that had already been completely pulverized into dust 6 decades ago. The creature was attempting to show her the horrors of hell, completely unaware that Ben Barry had been living there every single waking second since the end of the Dark War. "I know what I did," Ben rasped, her voice dry and devoid of any illusionary terror as she pushed straight through the phantom of her burning crewmate. "And I would do it again." Realizing its psychological attack was entirely useless, the vexed swarm resorted to brute physical force. The black vines rapidly hardened into massive, jagged thorns that shot out from the walls like spears. The brutal spikes slashed across her path, tearing deep, ragged gashes through the thick fabric of her protective suit. Sharp agony flared in her arms and legs as the toxic thorns sliced into her flesh. But she kept moving forward, her grip on the freezing, boiling canister remaining absolute. Every step left a dark trail of human blood on the biological nightmare coating the floor. But her brutal, mechanical march toward the center of the station never faltered. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing resistance, the dense black thicket suddenly broke apart. Ben stumbled into the cavernous chamber of the primary central reactor. The massive energy core was a blinding, roaring pillar of pure, superheated plasma, radiating an ambient temperature so intense that it instantly scorched her exposed skin. The air inside the chamber was dangerously thin, rapidly burning away in the oppressive heat. Directly at the base of the blinding pillar was the primary heat exchange port, the only direct pathway into the station's central ventilation arteries. Ben dragged herself toward the port, her body trembling violently from the severe blood loss and the agonizing burns covering her limbs. The intense heat of the reactor was causing the highly unstable chemical mixture inside the canister to expand past its critical threshold. The metal container was shrieking, microfractures forming along its frozen surface. She had mere seconds before the bomb detonated in her hands. With a final, desperate surge of raw willpower, Ben lifted the heavy cylinder and violently slammed it directly into the open socket of the heat exchange port. The heavy locking clamps engaged with a heavy clank, securing the volatile payload. There was only one step left: the manual thermal override lever. The heavy steel lever, designed to be operated only by heavy industrial machinery, was glowing a dull, threatening red from the ambient heat of the plasma core. Ben did not hesitate. She reached out with both of her bare, blistered hands and grabbed the searing metal. The smell of burning flesh instantly filled her nostrils as the skin on her palms instantly charred. But she locked her jaw and pulled downward with every ounce of strength remaining in her broken body. The heavy lever violently slammed into the ignition position. Instantly, a blinding, apocalyptic wave of brilliant blue fire erupted from the reactor core. The extreme, localized thermal shock vaporized the liquid freon and the toxic defoliants inside the canister simultaneously. A deafening, concussive boom violently shook the very foundations of the zenith belt. A massive, radiant shockwave of absolute zero chemical vapor blasted through the primary vents. The highly concentrated, volatile antibodies surged through every single corridor, every massive agricultural field, and every hidden maintenance shaft on the station at the speed of sound. The brilliant blue wave crashed into the vexed swarm. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The aggressive black biomass did not even have time to shriek. The microscopic parasites were instantly flash-frozen and then violently dissolved by the corrosive acidic undertone, crumbling into harmless, lifeless gray ash. The brilliant chemical explosion meticulously eradicated every single parasitic cell. Yet, by some miracle of desperate, improvised engineering, the wave harmlessly washed over the synthetic plant life and the organic tissue of the station's inhabitants. Inside the locked bunker, Princess Kaelin and the paralyzed warlords felt the massive concussive force shake the walls, followed by an eerie, total silence. A few moments later, the heavy electronic locks on the safe room door disengaged. The station's central computer, finally cleared of the alien infection, restored the primary emergency power. The princess and the royal guards violently pushed the heavy doors open, charging out into the command center. The red emergency lights had been replaced by the soothing, cool blue of the standard operational lighting. The horrifying black vines that had coated the outer corridor were completely gone, replaced by thick piles of fine gray dust. The rescue teams, led by the freed admirals who had torn off their frozen armor plates, sprinted down the corridor toward the reactor room. Princess Kaelin ran right behind them, her heart pounding with a heavy, dreadful certainty. They burst into the reactor chamber and froze. The blinding light of the core had stabilized into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. Lying crumpled on the grated metal floor, directly beneath the heat exchange port, was Ben Barry. Her botanical suit was completely shredded, soaked in her own blood and covered in dark soot. Admiral Tarek dropped heavily to his knees beside her motionless body, his hands shaking as he reached for her neck. A profound, collective gasp echoed through the room as the old warlord found a weak, incredibly stubborn pulse. She was still breathing, miraculously, beneath the layers of grease and grime. The shabby, outdated technician suit possessed a heavily modified, military-grade thermal insulation lining. It was a secret layer of heavy armor that had absorbed the absolute worst of the localized plasma blast, saving her from being completely incinerated. Paramedics rushed forward, carefully lifting the unconscious hero onto an anti-gravity medical stretcher. As they floated her out of the ruined chamber and into the massive main concourse of the station, the true scale of the event finally materialized. The massive blast doors of the main hangar bays were wide open. The entire Supreme Command structure of the Solari Imperial Fleet had arrived from outer space. Thousands upon thousands of highly decorated officers, elite shock troopers, and legendary fleet commanders lined the vast, cavernous halls. As the stretcher, carrying the broken, bleeding human woman, emerged into the light, a profound, heavy silence fell over the millions of personnel. No one shouted a victory slogan. No one cheered. No one uttered a single word of triumph, starting with the highest-ranking fleet commanders at the front, and rippling backward like a massive wave across an endless ocean. Every single member of the Solari military silently dropped to one knee. The deafening clatter of thousands of armored knees hitting the deck, plating echoed like rolling thunder, followed immediately by an absolute, reverent silence. They bowed their heads toward the cold floor, offering the highest, most ancient salute of ultimate respect to the woman who had just saved their empire for the second time. Princess Kaelin stood amidst the sea of kneeling warriors, looking down at the scarred, peaceful face of Ben Barry. The young royal felt a profound wave of absolute clarity wash over her. Standing in the center of that solemn, breathtaking silence, Kaelin finally found the answer to the question she had asked when the human first arrived. Ben Barry was not a myth. She was not a broken mechanic, and she was certainly not a ruthless, unfeeling war machine. She was the architect of their salvation, a soul who carried the agonizing weight of a dead world so that others could live. She was the absolute, undeniable, and greatest embodiment of silent sacrifice the universe had ever known. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please let us know your location in the comments below. If you found today's tale thrilling and emotional, we humbly ask for your support. YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, and we rely entirely on the kindness of our listeners to keep this channel alive. A donation of just $1 will immensely help us pay our hardworking staff so they can afford to feed their families and continue bringing these epic sci-fi adventures directly to you. You can easily support us by scanning the PayPal QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generosity means the universe to us. Have a wonderful day.